Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you joining us today at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, where we are broadcasting live from about 65 feet below ground. My name is Kate Neff. I'm your host today for Scientists in Action, T.Rex to Turkey. We are thrilled to have you, as well as two scientists with us today, not one, but two. We have a curator of paleontology, Tyler Leeson, and then we also have Garth Spellman, who's going to be a curator of ornithology. Before they get to talking about dinosaurs and birds and all the amazing things that we have behind us, a couple housekeeping items I want to go ahead and touch base on. If you are on camera schools, we now know that your cameras and your mics are working, but we're going to ask that you keep them off and keep muted until we do our Q&A in a bit. If you are not on camera, however, you will still get a chance to ask questions. Students, if you have your own computer, you can type your question in the chat, or teachers, if you are typing on behalf of your students, they can go in the chat as well, and we'll make sure that our scientists get those questions throughout the program. So without further ado, where are we? What is going on? What can you tell us about what you do here at the museum? And take it away, my friends.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We've been having a lot of fun today, and we are down in our zoology collections, which is why you can see behind the tables here, we have a lot of bird mounts and bird skeletons. But this is the space in the museum where we house all of our zoological collections. The cabinets lined up back there, they house our bird collection, our amphibian and reptile collection, shell collection, bug collection, and mammals. We have about 1.4 million specimens. So in this space and in this location right now, some of which we've pulled out and we're going to talk about today. And I am the curator of ornithology, or the curator of birds, if you have a hard time saying ornithology. And I study birds. I'm really interested in how bird species actually evolve. And I'm really interested in how we get so much avian diversity on the planet today. So we have over 11,000 species of bird living on the planet today. And I'm interested in how that diversity came to be. And I use specimens and things we can find within these specimens, DNA and other things, to answer those questions. And so today, we're going to talk about, if we go back way in time, how we can understand and what characteristics we can see in birds that connect them to some of the most magnificent animals that ever lived on the planet, dinosaurs, and how we understand birds as being living dinosaurs today. And so that's why I'm working with Tyler right here, our vertebrate paleontologist, because when we go back in time and we want to look at birds and dinosaurs and their shared characteristics and what makes them unique even, we have to get in the room and talk to one another. And so that's why we're here together today right now.
All right, well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Like Kate and Garth said, I'm a curator of paleontology here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And what that means is I study fossil animals, and I study fossil animals with a backbone. So everything from fossil fish to these magnificent creatures like dinosaurs sitting here behind me. And like Garth, I'm interested in sort of the rich biological and evolutionary history of life on planet Earth. And I'm sort of just interested in sort of the origin of the modern world and how we came to be. And so whereas Garth uses birds and living creatures, I use fossils to answer some of the questions that I'm interested in, because fossils provide a really unique insight into the origins of groups, among many other things. So I spend a lot of my time out in the field in various deserts, from Colorado Springs to Bolivia, building up these fossil data sets to try to answer some of the questions that I'm interested in. And that includes the Earth's last mass extinction that wiped out 75% of life on Earth, including the giant dinosaurs, as well as what happened afterwards with the origin of the modern world and the rise of our own group, the mammals. And then I also use the fossils to try to bridge these morphological gaps to talk about when and how different features arose, like the evolution of turtles. That's one of my specialties. Or in the case of today's subject, the origin of modern birds. And birds are, of course, these really unique animals because they have hollow bones, they don't have any teeth, they have feathers. There are these really unique groups, a group of organisms. And so we can use the fossil record to try to look at when the bird body plan arose and try to answer that question of who among extinct animals birds are most closely related to, and how do we know?
And so we're going to get into that, but before we get started, we just want to know where everyone is and how they're feeling. And so we want to interact with you a little bit. And so we have a poll question for you. We'd like to know what you think how big is the smallest dinosaur? So the size of a bee, the size of a chicken, or the size of a turkey? You should be able to take a poll and we can tally those results. If the poll isn't working for you, please feel free. You could type in the chat as well, and we'll try and see the answers as they fly up onto the screen. All right, do we have results?
And the winner is.
Ooh, it looks like the size of a chicken has won out. So we might like to think that, but the smallest dinosaur is, in fact, a living animal. So hummingbirds are the smallest dinosaur. And the smallest hummingbird is a bee hummingbird. And a picture of that will flash across your screen in 1 second. That bee hummingbird lives on the island of Cuba and is about 2 grams. So it weighs very little. Our smallest hummingbird in North America is the one I'm holding in my hand right here. This is a calliope hummingbird. This is the male, you could tell, because it's got the bright color underneath its chin right there and underneath its bill. And so we say it's a bit of a trick question because we're talking about dinosaurs, but we know through a number of characteristics that we're going to show you today that birds are in fact a living lineage of dinosaur. Today, they made it past that mass extinction. And some of the characteristics that they have, one of those is hollow bones. So this is the ulna wing bone of an American white pelican. And you can see we've cross-sectioned it here and it's broken, and you can see just how thin the bone is. And that's entirely hollow on the inside. So their skeletons are still very strong and rigid like ours, but their bones are structured very differently. They're hollow, and therefore this wing bone is extremely light, very, very light, almost like a reed, so a type of grass. But birds didn't evolve the first hollow bones. They, in fact, evolved early on, and Tyler's got one to show you right there.
Yeah, so this is the shin bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex. So the tibia that was found here in Colorado, in Littleton, Colorado. And this is a bone that was broken. So you're looking at it in cross section here. And you can see, just like the bone that Garth was showing there, you can see that this shin bone is also hollow. And this was one of the first clues that led scientists to this idea that dinosaurs and birds are closely related to one another. Then we're going to look at another feature that unites dinosaurs with birds. This is one of my favorite features here. This is a fossilized feather, and we're going to flash a picture of this feather onto the screen here momentarily. But this is a feather that we found in Colorado Springs from the same age of rocks that produced dinosaurs like T.Rex, Triceratops, and duckbill dinosaurs. And so, of course, among living animals, only birds have feathers. So this is a very strong feature that unites dinosaurs with birds.
Of course, the birds that you're probably familiar with look very different than that little downy feather that you saw in the rock at the fossil. So this is a golden pheasant. And modern birds display remarkable plumage variation and feather variation. You can see the incredible patterns and colors just in this one species, the iridescent green on its back and the iridescent violet that goes further, that's further down on its back. These feather colors, by studying the microstructure of the feather, we understand the pigments that are found in these feathers and how they produce this amazing color and how they produce amazing patterns, the way they're deposited in the matrix of that feather. And what is remarkable is by studying modern birds, we can actually study the rocks that fossil feathers are found in and find similar pigments that were left behind in the rock. And so we can guess, based on what we know about modern birds and how they're colored and how they're patterned, about how dinosaurs would have looked, what their feathers would have looked like. And we know that many were highly patterned and many probably were quite brightly colored as well. And we've learned that about dinosaurs from modern birds.
Yeah, and that technique of and that ability to know about the color of certain dinosaurs is new. This is a technique that was really only developed in the last 10 years. So it's a really exciting and sort of burgeoning avenue for a lot of paleontologists, is trying to figure out the color of many of their fossil animals. But it's pretty rare to get fossilized feathers preserved. You have to have a pretty unique set of circumstances to preserve a fossil feather. But we have other lines of evidence for feathers in the skeletons of several of these dinosaurs. And so here I'm holding the lower arm bone, the ulna, of a meat-eating dinosaur from Madagascar. You might be able to see those little white splotches along here. Those are the insertion points for feathers. So these are a feature called quill knobs, and this is a feature that's also found in modern birds.
And so in a modern bird skeleton, we can see those quill knobs very, very clearly and more pronounced. This is again the ulna, that wing bone of an American white pelican. And so you can see those insertion points where the feathers, the flight feathers of this pelican are attached to the bone. And that allows for a very rigid structure to form. And that's what allows for powered flight because of those feather attachments. So this is the wing of a wild turkey, which is appropriate because Thanksgiving is next week. But the secondary feathers here, I pull on them, I can't pull them out. They are anchored. The bone is still in this wing up here. And that ulna, those feathers are anchored into that ulna. And then the primaries here, those feathers are anchored more distally on the wing. And so that allows for a very rigid airfoil to form and allows for powered flight in a feathered animal. And we see those quill knobs lined up on the ulna of that dinosaur, and we can guess that those anchored feathers probably were very rigid, and maybe formed a sort or a type of wing, possibly.
All right, so another feature that aligns birds and dinosaurs is, well, let me start with this. This is a cast. That's why I'm able to hold it like this. This is a cast of a dinosaur that's about 68 million years old. It's from the Gobi Desert, and it's an oviraptor dinosaur. And so over here is the head of the animal, the beak, and then the neck, and then the rest of the body kind of going over here behind me. And you can see with this particular dinosaur here that it doesn't have any teeth. And so, of course, birds don't have any teeth. Some dinosaurs do. This just indicates that this particular lineage of dinosaurs is more closely related to birds than other lineages are, like the lineage, or like the dinosaur behind me here, the big horned dinosaur, which still retains its teeth.
Well, of course, as Tyler said, modern birds do not have teeth. They have evolved extremely diverse bill morphology. This here is a shoebill stork. It's one of the largest bills of any bird on the planet. But we see great diversity in bill shape. This particular bill on this shoebill stork is evolved for eating its favorite food, and that is hagfish, which are these long, really slimy eel-like fish. And you can see underneath, so on this skull, on the upper mandible here, it has these big, long ridges and sharp ridges underneath. And those have evolved for grabbing and holding on to its slimy prey, and it'll hold it in its bill and tilt its head back and swallow these fish whole. And this species, the species name for this is Balanasips rex, kind of like Tyrannosaurus rex, but really only terrifying in terms if you're a hagfish, not so much if you're a human.
All right, and then the last feature that we're going to talk about today, and one of the coolest features linking dinosaurs and birds, is this little bone right here, the strut-like bone that's on the breast of this particular dinosaur. And this is a bone called the furculum, and it's the fused collarbones. And you might be familiar with this because next week, many of you might be eating turkey, and you might be breaking the wishbone with your friend or cousin or whatever. And that's exactly what this is. This is the wishbone of a dinosaur, and a feature that's also, of course, found in modern birds.
So this is a pheasant skeleton that I have here that is articulated. And you can actually feel your collarbones, your clavicles, and you can feel you have two separate ones. They're on either side up here, and they don't come together. They are not fused. Only dinosaurs and birds have that fused furculum. And so you could see in this pheasant, it's right here. It rests below the shoulders and above the breastbone, and it's fused right there. And this bone I'm holding in my hand separately, this is the furculum or the wishbone of a turkey. So that is the one that you may, break with your cousin or your dad. But I do encourage you to tell whoever you're breaking that bone with that you should hold it this way. Shouldn't be up like this, because I used to do that when I was a kid with my brother. And as an ornithologist or a vertebrate paleontologist, we know that bone, right? The V should be facing down, because that's the way it is on the scale.
Do it the right way.
Yes. Well, we would love to take some questions for you now.
Yeah, so Rocky Mountain Prep, Berkeley, I know your camera and your mic was working earlier. If you'd like to go ahead and come back on camera and unmute yourselves and throw questions at our scientists, we'd love to hear from you. Now, remember, we are about 65 feet underground, so you're gonna have to speak nice and clearly loud towards the camera, just so we can hear you better. Hi there, what questions do y'all have?
Okay, guys. All right, guys. If you have a question you'd like to ask the scientist, please raise your hand. Tatum, what question do you have?
How big was the biggest dinosaur?
She said, "How big was the biggest dinosaur?"
Oh, that is a great question. How big was the biggest dinosaur? And the biggest dinosaurs are the long-necked dinosaurs, things like Apatosaurus or Diplodocus, animals like that. And the biggest dinosaur was about or over 60 tons big, so really, really big. And this size of an animal appears several times throughout the reign of the dinosaurs. And so it includes animals like a dinosaur from China called Mamenchisaur, a really long-necked dinosaur, and then another dinosaur that was equally as big. There's another one called Dreadnoughtus that was found in South America. But this group of animals, these long-necked dinosaurs, gets big several times throughout their evolutionary history, which I think is really, really cool. And they're the biggest land vertebrates to have ever lived.
Wow, what a good question.
Our biggest living dinosaur is right behind me right there. That's an ostrich. So that's Jeremy. So that's what we call him in our collection.
Not quite 60 tons.
Not quite 60 tons, no.
You can still hear us.
Great question. More questions from Rocky Mountain Prep, Berkeley.
Tennessee.
What was there any four-legged hunt?
Here, come over here and talk to the camera so they can hear you.
Was there any four-legged meat-eating dinosaurs?
Ooh.
Yeah, were there any? That's a really good question, because most of the meat-eating dinosaurs are on two legs, things like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus Rex. But there is some evidence that the dinosaurs like Spinosaurus, that's this really big dinosaur that lived in northern Africa during the very late Cretaceous. That was about 68, 70 million years old. That it may have spent some time walking on two legs, or four legs, excuse me. It had really long forelimbs. But for the most part, all of the meat-eating dinosaurs were running around on two legs. But great question.
Other questions? Ellie, can ask the questions. Sit down, guys.
What was the first dinosaur?
Can they hear you?
What was the first dinosaur?
Okay.
That is another great question. So some of the earliest dinosaurs from about 240 million years ago. And they keep on finding older dinosaurs, but a lot of these old ones are coming from South America. There's a dinosaur called Eoraptor, sort of the original raptor, the first raptor, that's one. There's another raptor-like dinosaur called Herrerasaurus. So these are some of the oldest dinosaurs to appear on the planet. That's about 235 to 240 million years ago.
Kind of cool to think, because if these dinosaurs are also really distant cousins of birds, it's kind of like, when did the original bird come around the same time then? Huh? So, great question. What's another question from Rocky Mountain Prep Berkeley?
Hendrix, come up and ask your question.
How big was T.Rex?
How big was T.Rex? Well, T.Rex was really big. Weighed several tons. It was about 40 feet long. This is just one single tooth that I found of a T.Rex. And this is a tooth that I found in Montana. And if you zoom, get close, you may be able to see these serrations along here, just like you find in modern day steak knives. There's no doubt what this animal was eating. It was eating a lot of meat, but this thing weighed several tons, was about 40 feet long, was probably about 12 feet high at the hip. So it was the largest meat-eating dinosaur to have ever lived. Pretty amazing.
Did you hear that? That's the tooth.
Big tooth. I bet you didn't brush them either. Let's get one more question from Rocky Mountain Prep before we invite
Miles,
on.
come here. I know.
Wasn't the Spinosaurus taller than the T.Rex?
Yeah, I knew I was going to ruffle some feathers there by saying T.Rex was the biggest. And so Spinosaurus does seem to be a little bit taller than a T.Rex, and skull may have been a little bit longer, but it was much more slender. It had a very kind of slender build to the dinosaur. Its overall body shape was pretty slender compared to just this massive Tyrannosaurus Rex. So we think Tyrannosaurus Rex weighed the most, even though some of these other dinosaurs like Spinosaurus, so it's a really great comment, were maybe a little bit taller and maybe had a little bit longer skull.
Great questions. If we have more time, we can always invite y'all back on. So thank you so much. Bridges Elementary, we're going to bring you on. And just a reminder, I see a couple of people have already posted things in the chat, but if you have questions, feel free to also stick them in the chat. So Bridges Elementary, if you want to go ahead and unmute and join us on camera. Hi there.
Dinosaurs.
Oop, if you could ask really nice and loud by the microphone, that will help us here in the basement.
Are all birds dinosaurs?
Are all of these dinosaurs? Oh, are all birds dinosaurs?
Yes. So all birds, in fact, are dinosaurs. They are the one group of dinosaur that made it past that mass extinction that Tyler studies, so 66 million years ago. So the diversity that we see today, though, has exploded. So birds, there are over 11,000 species of bird on the planet, and they can all track back their ancestry, so close ancestry to dinosaurs as well.
Great question. More questions from Bridges Elementary?
How many dinosaurs have been discovered?
How many dinosaurs have been discovered? That's a great question. I mean, we've been discovering dinosaurs for the last, discovering and naming dinosaurs for the last, 150 years. And so there have been several thousands into the tens of thousands of dinosaurs named, but it's a huge underestimate of the actual number of dinosaurs that lived. And that's because, like Garth was saying, there's 11,000 species of birds, dinosaurs, that are alive today. And that's just today. And so dinosaurs dominated the planet for about 160 million years. And so there's undoubtedly, way more dinosaurs yet to be discovered. We know that for a fact, because in fact, we go out every year, to deserts around the world and look for and find and collect dinosaur fossils. And we have many, many dinosaurs in the dozens just here at our own museum that are brand new to science, that represent new species of dinosaurs that we're currently working on.
And I think it's interesting to think, because the majority of animals that ever lived on this planet, the majority of life that has ever been lived on this planet is actually extinct. So, and we think about in this museum, you see these fabulous collections we have behind us. And in most museums, you are seeing about 0.001% of what they have in their collections underneath that scientists have access to and can study. That's very similar to if you think about life on this planet. So over time, so we have 11,000 bird species that live on this planet. But if you think that that is only 0.001% of that particular group of animal that has ever lived on this planet, there's so many more that have gone extinct. And the only evidence of finding those would be in the ground. So there's so much more to discover when it comes to learning about diversity on this planet.
There are a lot of animals, which is amazing. Other questions from Bridges?
Are birds still evolving?
Ooh, are birds still evolving?
Excellent question. So birds are, of course, still evolving. Like anything else on the planet that is alive today, they are constantly changing and evolving in response to their environment. That is one of the things that I actually study. I study how modern birds are responding and evolving in response to climate change. I also study how birds are evolving in response to or in adapting to human-altered environments like urban areas. So any animal that is on the planet today is going to evolve over generations in response to its environment. And by having the animals in collections like this, we can see we have birds in our collection that date back to 1842. And if we compare that species and the specimen we have of that species from 1842 to today, we can see how it's changed. Many birds, in fact, their wings have actually gotten longer and less broad over the last few years because they're needing to exchange heat faster with their environment, and a longer, thinner wing and smaller body allows them to do that. And that is a response to climate change. I mean, we only know that those changes have occurred because we have museum collections dating back hundreds of years.
Great question. We're going to ask another question of Bridget, or have Bridges ask another question just a minute. But I do see this one in the chat that sort of relates to what you were just talking about. So if we're looking at things changing, for example, today, like what tools do we use, and what tools do we use to study these animals?
So we use a lot of very common tools that you might have in a classroom. You think about a ruler. That's how you measure length of things. And we measure the lengths of certain traits of birds. So we can measure how long the wing is. We can measure how broad the wing is. So we can do the same with measurements of different bones in the skull and other things. We usually use instruments that are a little more precise than, a 1 foot ruler. So we use calipers in order to measure that. But then my work also involves looking at the DNA of birds. And so from any of this material on the table, I can get DNA from any of these specimens. So including this egg, which is 1,000 years old, I can get DNA out of these specimens. But upstairs, we have another collection for modern material. We have a frozen tissue collection where we have freezers that are keeping samples at about minus 100 degrees Celsius. And I extract DNA out of those samples to study modern birds. And so not only can we see how they're changing in their body shape in response to changes in their environment, we can also see how their DNA is evolving in response to changes in their environment.
Very cool. Sounds like you might have some of these tools at your disposal in your very own classroom. So Bridges Elementary, let's get one more question from you.
How and where do you find fossils?
Ooh, how and where do you find fossils?
That's a great question. The great thing about the fossil record is that fossils are everywhere. Fossils are found, wherever there is rock exposed. And so that's why we spend a lot of times going to deserts versus the woodlands or the jungle. It's simply because we need to have rocks exposed. But fossils are just everywhere because of this rich evolutionary history in deep time. And so you can find here in Colorado, there's a wonderful record of ocean life as well as land life with like dinosaurs and things like that. But no matter where you are, no matter where you're tuning in from, there's undoubtedly fossils in your own very backyard. You just have to go and look for sort of the fresh road cuts or anywhere again where there are rocks exposed. And then finding the fossils is pretty simple. We simply go to these areas, we go to these deserts, we walk around and we look for little bits of broken bone or shells, if you're an invertebrate paleontologist, or plants, and we follow the bone trail sort of up the hill. And then if we're really lucky, we'll see bones sticking out of the hill, and that's where we know to start digging. We start digging when we see bones sticking out of the hill. But I would encourage you to go outside and to start looking around, because again, no matter where you're tuning in from, chances are there have been a lot of great fossils found in your area.
Very cool. Thank you, Bridges Elementary. Those were amazing questions. We're going to go ahead and answer some of the questions from the chat. So this question is kind of, what can you tell us about the meteor, or like that kind of great extinction event? Would some of these dinosaurs, for example, that died with the extinction, would they be able to survive today if it hadn't happened? Tell us about that.
So this is one of Earth's greatest stories. It's when this giant asteroid, about 6 miles in diameter, twice the size of Denver, slams into Earth off the Yucatan Peninsula, so in the Gulf Coast, and it sends parts of modern-day Mexico into the atmosphere. And what goes up must come down, so the crust rains back down, and it forms these little molten balls of death called spherules, and it lights the world on fire. And so that's pretty wild, right? It creates these giant tsunamis, it creates these thermal pulses. But the real kill mechanism for, like the southern hemisphere was where the asteroid hit. And so it hit this carbonate, it hit a shallow ocean. And the type of rock in that shallow ocean is called a carbonate. And it dissolved that reef. So it's just a reef. Think of the Great Barrier Reef. And it dissolved the reef, and it sent those aerosols up into the atmosphere. And then it covered the globe, and that blocked out the sun. And without the sunlight, you kill the plants, you kill the forams in the ocean, and then that just trickles all the way up till it eventually kills these great dinosaurs. And then the last thing I want to say about that is that again, where the meteorite hit is so important. So the timing is so important, because now imagine the Earth is spinning, the asteroid comes in. Had it hit 30 minutes earlier or 30 minutes later, it would have hit in one of these deep oceans. It's a different type of rock in the deep oceans, and it wasn't a reef, and the dinosaurs would not have gone extinct. So the timing of when that giant asteroid hit 66 million years ago, had it been 30 minutes earlier, 30 minutes later, dinosaurs would still be here, and we would not be here today, which I think is pretty darn cool to think about.
We'd have dinosaurs and birds, but we would not be here talking.
That is both amazing and terrifying. Hey, Garth, I'm going to throw this kind of your way, and I know you mentioned this in the earlier broadcast. So birds, however, it sounds like did survive this mass extinction event. What about birds is so special that they hung around and we now have 11,000 species of them?
So we do think actually at the time that some of it had to do with the fact that they were actually probably pretty small. So at the time, we think that many of the birds that survived that mass extinction event would have been about the size of a small chicken or small land bird. So kind of actually like this golden pheasant, but maybe even a little bit smaller than this. And birds had an advantage. Many birds that are this size are often granivorous and insectivorous. And that means what a granivore is eating, they're eating seeds. And so because you had this essentially nuclear fallout that occurred, the seeds are still in the ground, and if they're not germinating, the birds can find them and then also eat those subterranean earthworms and insects that they're scratching around for in the ground that wouldn't have been affected by this massive nuclear winter that occurred because of the asteroid. So it also helped, of course, that they were feathered, very well insulated from their environment. They probably were able to get into holes and burrows and hide out from that massive episode. So they were pretty fortunate, and they were also endothermic. So meaning they maintained a body temperature, not controlled by the outside. So the large animals, especially like the T.Rexes and the large meat eaters, they would have been some of the first animals to just blink out. So if they weren't fried in that initial exposure to these hell rocks that were coming down on them, then they would have perished because there would be no large prey for them to feed upon anymore. Even the large animals that would have died in that original impact, and the results of it probably would have burned up pretty quickly, is what we imagine. So anything bigger than a small animal would certainly have perished. And so we think that the birds that got through, they all were pretty similar to one another. And then they've diversified into the tremendous diversity that we see on the planet today.
Wow. So these really big birds, like the one that laid perhaps that egg over there, wouldn't have survived.
So if a large bird had occurred, the one that laid this egg, in fact, this is an elephant bird egg. And elephant birds were the largest modern birds that we know on the planet. They lived on Madagascar, went extinct 1,000 years ago. And it was a bird that would have been about 5 to 6 feet taller than Jeremy, our ostrich back here. So able to look over our cases and weighed close to a ton. It's a massive bird, a very, very big bird. That bird would never have survived that asteroid impact. Mhm.
Sad, but cool that we had it later. On the topic of eggs, so we've heard a lot at the beginning about how dinosaurs and birds were similar. What are areas in which they might be different?
Excellent.
Yeah, so that is a really important question. You know, we've been focusing on all of the similarities, but I think it's just as important to focus on the differences. So here I've got a cast of a nest of dinosaurs that was discovered in China. And you can see that a lot of these little round things here are all the eggs. And you can see that the eggs occur as pairs. So we have a pair here, we have a pair here, more pairs down here. And so this suggests that dinosaurs had 2 ovaries and 2 oviducts that laid eggs in pairs, which differs from that found in modern birds.
So I have an American robin nest right here. You could see those blue robin eggs on the inside. And you can see the intricate pattern of the nest, which is quite different than what the nests of those animals or the oviraptors would have been. And of course, it has 4 eggs in it, but we do know modern birds lay a single egg at a time. Egg laying occurs almost 24 hours after each other when they are laying eggs. So 1 egg a day, essentially. And we know also from looking at the anatomy and looking inside birds, that birds have a single ovary and a single oviduct, which is very different. So if you have paired ovaries and paired oviducts, you're laying 2 eggs at a time and not 1, like modern birds. Another feature, if you were to look at the microscopic surface structure of these eggs, these robin eggs, you would see that pores that are present in the shell of that egg, so are uniformly distributed around the entire circumference of the egg. So there are pores all around it, and those pores are critical for gas exchange and oxygen exchange. In these oviraptor, if you look at the microscopic structure in the shell, that's the imprint that's left, those pores are concentrated on the top. You don't see many pores on the bottom side of those eggs. And so the egg morphology is different where the pores are. And it also lets us know that these oviraptors didn't have a behavior that we see in modern birds. Modern birds, every day they're constantly turning their eggs because you can get oxygen diffusion across the entire egg. And that's very important for the development of that little bird in the egg. Dinosaurs didn't have that behavior. And if they had turned their eggs, they likely would have suffocated the developing embryo inside because they would smother all those pores in their nest. So we see very, very significant differences in the reproductive biology between these bird-like dinosaurs and modern birds.
Amazing. Last question I want to go ahead and pose as we're wrapping up today's amazing session. If we have students in the chat who are interested in becoming an ornithologist or a paleontologist, how do they do that? How do you go about becoming a scientist who gets to do stuff like this?
Well, the first thing that you need to do is you have to have a passion for going out and observing the natural world. And for me, as a young boy, it was pretty easy. I loved observing the natural world and going out and seeing the species that lived around me and how they interacted with their environment. But that's really what you need to start, is the passion and the curiosity to ask questions about what you see. And as long as you have the passion to go out, observe, and ask questions, that will serve you best as a scientist in the future. Because the most incredible questions to ask about the biological world haven't been asked yet. We don't even know what those questions are, because we're discovering new things about this, about species that we thought we knew extremely well even today. So my advice is, kindle that passion, go outside, make observations, ask questions, and that'll serve you well in the future.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, just be curious. You can get involved with your local museums. You can go to the library and take out books on fossils in your area, or the animals, the birds, the mammals, and then just go outside and make some of your discoveries of your very own.
Very cool. Well, on that note, hey, thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Garth, for joining us. Thank you, everyone behind the camera. Kim and Asa upstairs, we couldn't have done it without you. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. If you enjoyed our Scientists in Action, we would love for you to join us again in December on Thursday, December 8th. We have Scientists in Action Imaging the Ancient World, where we'll talk a little bit more about ancient prehistoric animals and how technology allows us to see inside rocks and things like that, and paleontologists to understand what exactly they're looking at. So, hey, thanks again. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Class is on camera. If you want to go ahead and unmute and join us again, we would love to send you off, and otherwise, see you next time.
Thanks for joining. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Next time.
Bye.
I missed it. I know.
All right.
I was here the whole time.
No, I'm just kidding. How was it? Let me hear.
Good.